they're spending more time with it. And I'm not here to critique whether this is right, wrong, but this is my observation. This has been my observation. And today, the graphic narrative, if we look at it, has escaped the cultural exclusion of much of the comics universe and has gained great respect, as Beatons and Frey had said in 2015. But our experience, as I told you, of the rejection based on working on trivial genre was a much later 2015. So I think we are still struggling, but we are on our way to being accepted more. We are definitely, graphic narrative is being definitely accepted more in academic spaces. Okay, and something very interesting happens in as late as 2018. You have Sabrina by Dick Trazo. It is a graphic narrative again, and it's quite popular because it indulges a lot with social media, pop culture. So it talks about, it's the first graphic narrative to have ever been longlisted in Man's Booker Prize. So the entry of a verbal visual literacy into a category that's completely verbal is in itself a move towards more acceptance of graphic narratives and visual verbal literacy. So you already know that different topics, very serious topics, have been worked on in graphic narratives. For instance, Persepolis, very well known, is on the Islamic Revolution of 1979. It explores themes of political and social upheaval, personal identity. So these are all the texts. Palestine Needs No Introduction by Joe Sacco, another very well-known text. It's again on the crisis of the Israel-Palestine crisis and the vagaries, traumas of the Palestinians. Okay, and Duck is again on working in oil fields, capitalistic scenarios, exploitation, sexual harassment. Burma Chronicles again is a very interesting travelogue. Guy Deleuze does this all the time. He writes graphic travelogues. He visits the country, writes those travelogues, and he exposes those countries. So he does the same on North Korea as well, called Pyongyang. And this Burma Chronicles is also something similar that exposes the very, very repressive governments and that uses isolation and control to tame its citizens. So I'm not going to hark on this because I think you already know how to read a comics. I'm directly moving on to the graphic turn in South Asian literature. So when we talk about the graphic turn in South Asian literature, one of the questions that gets asked in the context of South Asia is this a turn towards the graphic, a revival, or is it a literary development of contemporary times influenced by global literacy? Okay, and when we look into the trajectory, and I'm not referring to visual cultures, I'm not referring to the post-partition Comics Weekly and all those here as of yet, but I'm talking political comics as well. But I'm talking about this very book format that was coming out after the partition in the South Asian context is a revival. We can consider this turn as a revival. It's not something new in the South Asian context. It's just a revival. If you were to consider the numerous reworkings of mythologies and also comic book series like Chanda Mama, the one that Dr. Aloysius works on, Amar Chitra Katha as well. So think about Chanda Mama being published on 15th August 1947. So since then it was published until years back when it was paused. So we can trace the let's say the origins of graphic literature to something older. So it's not something that it's been developing post the publication of Moz or something. It's a revival of a format that was already existent, and it's also a move towards the serious direction as well. However, if you were to talk about graphic novel, the first graphic novel in the South Asian context has to be Arijit Sen's The River of Stories, which was published in 1994. Many of you may be already knowing that this was one of those texts that kind of protested against the building, against the construction of the dam on the Narmada River. And this project was funded by a very small NGO. And it extensively talked about the protest held by the marginalized indigenous communities who were protesting against this ecological disaster of constructing the dam. Okay. And today, since Arijit Sen's River of Stories, where there are many graphic literature that has been written. We have one like Delhi Calm on the emergency, this side, that side on the partition, something that I will be talking about. Due to 3 graphic novels on the Kashmir issue, on the Kashmir context. This is constantly moving. There are many others, one on the Naxalite movement as well. So we're constantly working. This genre is definitely being embraced by Indian and South Asian writers more and more. And today we can say, this is a Gravit's observation back in 2015, that Indian graphic novel, from its very origins, that is starting with Arijit Sen's River of Stories, has manifested an inclination to bring to the surface issues underreported in conventional news media and dominant histories. This showcases how graphic narratives can function as counter archives, or at least has been aspiring to function as counter archives, counter historiographies in the context of the South Asian space. And interestingly, another aspect is that the graphic novel is rapidly repositioning the medium itself. So remember the form that I just showed you, right? This is the very Western layout of a graphic novel or a comics. But when you look into the Indian graphic novels today, they're actually experimenting with the form as well. Okay, they're not abiding by. Think about Bhimayana, you might have come across. Think about something like Restoring Partition, this side, that side. They're not aligning with the form handed down by the Western counterpart. We are reinventing the form to suit our socio-political crisis, our culture, our philosophies as well. So these are the few of the graphic narratives that I'll be looking at due to dearth of time. Munnu is where I'll be giving you examples from, as well as this side, that side. This side, that side, as you know, is on the partition. Mundu on the Kashmir conflict and the crisis and the separatist issues that goes on in there, told from a child perspective. Then we're also going to look at other graphic novels from other parts of South Asia. Vanni being a very well-acclaimed text. Vanni is on the Sri Lankan conflict, the conflict between the Sinhalas and the Sri Lankan Tamils, and it showcases the genocide that happened, the human rights abuse that happened. In fact, the writer Benjamin Dix, as well as the creator Lindsay Pollock, calls this text a non-fiction fiction. So it's interesting coinage, non-fiction fiction. So they want you to perceive this as a testimony in itself. And also Justice, which is relatively new, which does not engage in with a lot of experimentation, but it is a very significant text because there was a void beforehand in terms of literary representations, or at least graphic representations of the Nepalese civil war. So these are the texts that would happen between 1996 to 2006. So these are the few of the texts that we'll be looking into. And it is also important here to state that conflict is understood not merely as armed confrontation, but as a multi-layered socio-political condition rooted in the historical and ongoing struggles of South Asia. So by conflict in this paper, I would mean state violence, militarization, ethnic tensions, insurgencies, border disputes, caste and communal fissures, to name a few. So with this, we come to the 3 main sections of the paper, and let me dive in directly to the first part. Yeah. So even before we leap on to understanding what counter archives are, we first need to understand what archives are. So many of you are already familiar. Archives are collections of historical documents, records, and objects, often held in physical or digital space for preservation. However, there are shortcomings to archives, as you would already know, having read subaltern studies, that they are induced. They have a lot of gaps and biases due to historical factors. Guha would postulate how historiography in South Asian context is essentially colonialist and elitist. And again, if you were to refer to Derrida, in 1995, he writes this text called Archive Fever, and he explicates on how every archive is a site of power, authority, and exclusion. So this is why he writes, every archive is at once institutional and selective. So counter archives can be defined as collective practices or forms of documentation that challenge the authority, omissions, and silences of official archives by preserving the memories, experiences, and narratives of marginalized groups. And this is where counter narratives come in. They challenge their institutional authority by disputing what Derrida calls archival violence. So think about how colonizers as well as elites kind of perform archival violence. Think about how historiography is always written by the ones in power, by the ones who are elite. So this is archival violence because you are erasing the subaltern history, right? History from below. So his work proposes the philosophical foundations for understanding how counter archives emerge against dominant historical narratives. So instead of preserving what the state once remembered, counter archives preserve what communities refuses to forget. So let us explore this with the example. We've already discussed this. Let me move directly to the example. Yeah. Okay, so let's analyze the same with an instance from the graphic narrative on partition. And this is from the text This Side, That Side, Restoring Partition, curated by Vishwajyoti Ghosh. Now, this graphic, what makes this graphic narrative interesting is this anthology is special because it's writers and artists across the subcontinent, so from Bangladesh, Pakistan, have contributed to creating this narrative. Some few of the stories, graphic narratives in this particular anthology are also co-created. So maybe the narrative is told by a Pakistani author and etched by an Indian artist. So it's very interesting, very emotional project in many ways. So this particular story that I intend to discuss is titled An Old Fable, and it is written by none other than Tabish Khair and drawn by Priya Korean. What this narrative, just to give you a bird's eye view, is basically trying to say, it's trying to talk about how the Indian civilians never wanted the partition, but the Britishers misinterpreted our demands and to suit themselves, and then divided the country. Okay, so I request you to look into the image now, and do not look this as a single page. So you look top to bottom, okay, because there are two pages here. So the first page is where you have the women, men out there, and you see the speech bubbles that are completely empty. And you see that the reason for the speech bubbles being completely empty is that they're saying something, but not essentially being heard. It's not that they're not saying something. You can see their expression. They are clearly in despair. They look in despair. They are clearly making a plea, and they are clearly asking for something. Okay, and then below that you get to see, and one point I missed, that you see people of different ethnic groups here as well. You see the man in skull cap, you see a woman in burqa, you see a man in the Nehruvian cap, and a woman in sari trying to talk about Hindu Muslims. So basically it's trying, the story indicates that both Hindus and Muslims didn't want the country. The common people never wanted the country to be divided. And if you move on to the next image, the one below it, you see the king's courtiers interpreting for the king. They wrote down the crowd's complaints and convoluted petitions full of legalese. Now, this is representative of the British East India Company that kind of misinterpreted what the colonized had to say. And the next page, in the next page, you get the top panel says it all. What did they write down in their, in their notes? How did they interpret the message of the citizens? They interpreted it as, the saffron crowd wants my son to be promoted. The green crowd wants to invest in my business. Both the crowd wants you to order a perpetual scholarship at Oxford for my family. So you can clearly see how the demands of the colonized or demands of the citizens of India were misinterpreted by the Britishers. So, and then below that you have the king. Actually, he's another. He's a mockery. He's a mockery of King Solomon, and he kind of divides the country into three, rather than not dividing the country at all. So it's basically trying to highlight how colonial histories was fabricated, manufactured, concocted, very Eurocentric, hegemonic, and thereby erasing and effacing the identity of the colonized. Okay, so that's the graphic narrative exposes the colonizer and the colonialist historiography, thereby undermining the colonizer and producing what Membe would call disobedient history. So if you were to look into this graphic page, you see a disobedient history. This is not a history that aligns with the mainstream narratives, or let's say conventional historiography or archives of the Britishers, especially in this regard. So this is a kind of disobedient history, thereby serving as a counter archive. This is also a jibe at Sir Cyril Ratcliffe, who was appointed to divide the province of Punjab and Bengal along religious lines. So this is the story all about. Let me give you another example of decoding counter archives and decentering dominant historiography. So this is a narrative that talks about colonial India and kind of trivializes and mocks the British rulers. So goes along the same lines, but this is from a different author. I think you know Sir Nath Banerjee, and this is from the Barn Owl's Wanderous Capers, and the first chapter, which is called The Dark Armpits of History, the dark armpit being a reference to the colonial period. Okay, so what you get to see here are all marginalized people. Marginalized socially, economically, that can be understood. You can see Chobedars, attendants, Jamadars, cleaners, Kidmugdars, waiters, Hazam, Muslim Baba, Ayas, Nasmaid, Pankha Kula, coolies, fan bearer, Muchis, cobblers. Okay, so you get to see different people from the different individuals from the marginalized sections of society. In the page of archives, we know that the marginalized or the subaltern do not find space except as footnotes. Okay, in the page, he is portraying the servants of the British, or as he defines them, the real support system of the imperialist. And he's trying to rewrite his history from below. So these are people you never get to hear about in archives, but when you read this graphic novel, you get to see their role. Throughout the text, you will see how they're observing the British officials, how they're taking note, how they're attending the British offices as well. So that's what this text is about, decentering and writing a history from below. I wanted to discuss, this would be the final example in this section. Dr. Aloysius, when I have 5 minutes, please remind me. Okay. So this would be the final.
No issues.
Okay. Thank you. So when we so this is for a third example in the same section. Let's explore how graphic narratives question established histories by producing counter narrative. So this particular narrative is also from the same anthology, and it's titled The Taboo, and it focuses on a woman and refugee camps post-partition, and we're looking at the Bengal side now. Okay, so what is being discussed here, this particular text is titled Taboo, and is created by Malini Gupta and drawn by a very young and talented artist called Duti Mittal. So this particular narrative revolves around the life of Shalini, who also had to escape from Bangladesh during the riots and settled in Calcutta in the Cooper's camp. It's a well-known camp in Calcutta. There's history there. Presently, we have Kolani, to my knowledge, there. So in Cooper's camp, she was living there, and we get to see while her husband was succumbing to the traumas of partition or trauma of displacement, let's say, trauma of experiencing violence. It was she who was the breadwinner, and she was trying to make a life for herself in a new country, in a new context, by embracing the job of a mechanic. Okay, so why is this a counter narrative? Because it counters the criticism that was specially alleged on Bengali refugees. What was it? What was the allegation? That the refugees coming from Bengal were lazy. They were not intended to work hard, and they wanted to support. They wanted to live in the camp and be under the rations of the government. Okay, this narrative counters that argument, because you see a woman who's not interested in living in the camp. And secondly, when you read the historiography of a partition, you see that women and children are the worst victims of partition. And there is also this line that's added that women were not very resilient in terms of adapting to the change, whereas men were. Now, this could be serving as a counter narrative, which showcases that here is a woman who is who's helping even a husband when he is not being able to function. Okay, so this story was a journalistic piece about a struggle of a woman faced in a refugee camp in Bangladesh after the partition of India to stand up for herself. So I now request you to look at the artwork. We have been discussing primarily the themes and the verbal aspects. Let's also look into the artwork. Especially this one is very interesting. So as you can see, this graphic narrative completely departs deliberately from dominant Western comics grammar. You can see that regular grids, clean gutter, linear sequencing has completely vanished. This is because they want to embody a distinctly South Asian, non-Western aesthetics that is shaped by memory, displacement, and the spatial logic of refugee camps. So when we gaze at this, we cannot read it from left to bottom, right? We have to look at it all together and then follow the trail of the road, right? So instead of Western left to right panel flows, the paper follows a labyrinthine path that mirrors the refugee camp's geography. The winding road becomes the structural spine of the narrative. The page must be navigated rather than read, mimicking the experiences of moving through a congested camp. And this is a refusal of the grid. The landscape itself becomes the paneling device, as you can see, right? Duti is very experimental with her art. Her other works is as experimental, and this page acts as a counter archive of Cooper's camp. What does it document? It documents caste-based neglect. It documents refugee bureaucratic violence, right? As I was telling you, it also questions. It also, let's say, exposes failed rehabilitation policies. It showcases socioeconomic precarity of the refugees who were displaced, and also finally outlines gender discrimination. So through diagrammatic precision, the testimonial text, it becomes an alternative historical record, a hallmark of several South Asian graphic narratives. Okay. This is same thing. I think the ones who have read Vimayana, a gardener in the Westland, can relate. Breaking free away from the pattern, from the format that was handed over to us. Right. So this contrast with Western graphic memoirs that centers interiority, what's inside the panel. Here, the focus is collective trauma and also structural violence. So what Duti Mittal is also trying to show here is that a narrative like on displacement and trauma cannot happen through the structured or linear sequence of the Western format. Okay. With this, I come to the next section. So, sites, graphic narratives as sites of synthesis of public-private spheres. So, we know that in history books or political science books, the personal is generally separated from the political. So you get a very detached writing, like in the way of formal or journalistic writing, for that matter. That's how most archival works are. However, public and private spheres of life are, in reality, very inseparable. They interact incessantly in the real world and are in a state of flux, right? So South Asian graphic narratives depicting conflict create a fusion of the two spaces that allow for the realistic representation of socio-political history. Graphic narratives merge personal, which could be considered like family, bond, home, and public, which could be taken as the state, conflicts, protest. They amalgamate both the spheres. Okay. Now, this synthesis creates hybrid memory space, where trauma circulates between the intimate and political. These hybrid sites serve as micro archives. So, let me try to elaborate on this with an example. Many of you may be recognizing it. This is from the graphic narrative Munnu. Munnu by Malik Sajjad is again another very critically well acclaimed text on the Kashmir crisis, especially critiquing Indian government for their excessive militarization and human rights abuse. So, if you were to look at this text, this is one of the pages on the early pages, and we have a child. Munnu is a child protagonist, again, much like Persepolis when it began. So, here the private sphere represented by the domestic scene at the top. So you have 3 panels in this page, and you please take a minute to look at the panel. In the first panel, you have a very personal imagery of a father and son. Okay. In the second was he's thinking to himself that if a crackdown were to happen, then I'll get more time to work on, when father will be gone, I'll be taking one of his wood chips and working on it. So what this is doing is this page, and just below this very personal, a very innocent, let's say, conversation and imagination, you have the very sharp, abrupt interruption of a crackdown, of what happens during a crackdown in Kashmir. So this page from Munnu visually and thematically dramatizes the collapse of the boundary between private and public sphere under militarized occupation in Kashmir. The private sphere, represented by the domestic scene at the top, where Munnu's father dismisses the value of Munnu's art. He's saying Papa was hard to convince because he was according to his father, he was not ready to work on wood chips yet, is abruptly interrupted by the public's spectacle of state power, which is just immediately below in the third panel. It covers the larger portion of the text, right, of the page. So the lower panel depicts the army's routine crackdown, where male bodies are extracted from home, lined up in public square, and subjugated to surveillance, frisking, and identification. Now, this intrusion renders the home permeable. Now, home is no more the safe space, no longer a protected inner world, but an extension of the militarized public domain, where any time the military can walk in. Right? The state authority flows seamlessly from the street to the household, dissolving any distinction from domestic interiority and public policing. So in Munnu, the public and private space are not separate but contiguous, collapsing spaces, each shaping and deforming the other under conditions of prolonged conflict. Now, just a moment. Now, something similar is what we get to see in Justice, which is the graphic narrative on Nepali civil war which was held from 1996 to 2000. So how does the page, just have a look at the page and you get to see the boot. It starts with the boot of our army, right? So the page visually captures one of the defining features of the Nepalese civil war, the violent collapse of boundaries between the private domestic space and the public militarized sphere. This narrative illustrates how home, traditionally space of kingship, intimacy, safety, and cultural continuity, were repeatedly breached by state forces and sometimes by Maoist rebels, turning the home into a site of interrogation, surveillance, and fear. Okay. You see the opening frame, a boot violently kicking the door, symbolizes the forced entry of the public armed state in the private household. This act is not just physical but symbolic. The home is stripped of its protective boundary, and the same thing you got to see in Munnu as well. Okay, and what the image where the parents are dragged, if you look into the next page, in the other page, you get to see the parents on the knees. Um, the image where the parents are dragged outside demonstrate how domestic time, like meal, because this was their mealtime conversation, daily work, is suddenly interrupted by state intervention. The home no longer functions as a boundary between inner private and outer worlds, a sanctuary from conflict, or a space of familial autonomy. Instead, public violence dictates the rhythm of household life, rendering the private sphere unstable and permeable. So, this would be one example. I'll show you another example, and this takes this idea of synthesis of private sphere, one step further, and this is from Vanni. Now, Vanni is on the Sri Lankan Civil War, final days of the Sri Lankan Civil War. That's 2008, 2007, 2008, 2008, 2009, if I'm not very wrong. So, what happens is here we get to see the. I think you know that they were being persecuted. The Sri Lankan Tamils were being persecuted by, on one hand, the Sinhalese, who thought that this they had no right to be. They were minorities. They had no right to be. Whereas they were also being persecuted by Tamil tigers, who used them as kind of a cover. Who used this population, the civilians, as a kind of cover for their separatist activities, right? So in this particular situation, they're on the move because the government has announced these are the final days of the conflict, civil war. And the government has announced that they have to leave their homes and travel to a no fire zone. Okay, so here you get to see the Sri Lankan Tamilians on their foot. You can see there are people on barefoot as well, and they are all traveling to this safe zone where they will not be attacked or shelled. There will be no shelling. Okay, so you get to this page from the Vani visualizes the complete dissolution of the private sphere during wartime displacement. Okay, the mass movement reveal how in conflict zone the public sphere engulfs the private, transforming even intimate family routines into acts performed under collective duress. So one of the captions towards the right hand side of the page reads, Thipa clung to Rajani and closed her eyes. And I think that sticks to me because that is the emotional key to the page. Now, because they have lost their home, the home which is traditionally a very physical private space, has disappeared. Thifa's act shows that in displacement, when you're displaced, the private sphere collapses into the body and memory, becoming portable and psychological rather than spatial. Okay? So these are all private domestic gesture. You can see here feeding, carrying, soothing, yet they occur in the open on the mud slick highway, witnessed by hundreds of strangers. So there's no idea of public. This complete dissolution of the private sphere. Okay, displacement forces intimate family labor into the public space, making the private hyper visible. Okay. Okay, sorry. With this, I come to the second last section of the paper, of the lecture, which is on graphic narrative as visual verbal testimony. So graphic narratives also frequently operate as testimonies to necropolitics, and I'm invoking Akili Membe here. It describes the state power to decide who may live and who has to die. These works document how conflict produces zones of abandonment and disposability. Okay, and how visual testimony can make visible what official archives suppress. Okay, so if I were to, I wanted to quote this text by Nayar, who this is from the human rights graphic novel, and he's talking about how this human rights graphic novel allows us, or indeed forces us, something that we would not choose to say, okay, but this would force us to see the interconnectedness of suffering, the mutuality of vulnerability, the similar but not identical instantaneations of resistance across different physiognomics, bodies, and context. They approach the globalizing rights discourse alongside the dialectics between the local specifics of, say, violations or resistance and international concerns. So I'll just directly move on to an example here. This is
Hello?
hello. Hello.
We would actually request you to slowly think about concluding it by summarizing whatever is left, perhaps.
Sure. I'll give just one example and I'll wrap it here. Okay. So
All right.
here you can see. Yes. So here you can see quickly. I'll just go through it. During the Sri Lankan Civil War, UN was not actually there. The state government, then Sri Lanka, had asked to have UN to leave, saying that they cannot guarantee the UN safety. So what happened is nobody was documenting the war crimes that were going on. So this particular picture depicts how a safe zone or no fire zone was actually being bombarded, and here you can see how people are being killed. So again, invoking it's kind of a forensic witnessing space. We can see this graphic narrative or this page as a forensic witnessing space, presenting evidence of what Akili Membe would call a necropolitical regime, a state apparatus that decides who may live and who must die, and which civilian lives are rendered expendable. So similarly, just this is arguably the very potent image from the very text, and this is again a reference to the Sri Lankan Civil War and human rights abuse of Geneva Convention as well. So you are supposed to treat prisoners of war with dignity. These are the ones who are on their knees with the eyes covered. These much later, much after the war was over, we did have that documentary on the killing fields published by John Snook in Channel 4, and that's when we come to know that all these war crimes had happened. Otherwise, we did not know. And Pollock is making a reference to this, where they are filming when the soldiers had surrendered, they were stripping them, they were filming them, and you can see a tear in the eye of the soldier who had surrendered, and they're filming them naked, and there's no dignity there. Okay, so in Akili Membe's terms, is a depiction of necropolitics, the state's absolute authority over life and death, exercised through the creation of death walls, where civilian bodies are rendered killable, disposable, and unmournable. So thus, through such imageries, Vani performs an archival function that the state refuses, and the Sri Lankan state still refuses to acknowledge it. It documents the lived realities of war crimes, preserving the voices and bodies that institutional archives erase. So in doing so, the graphic narratives becomes an indispensable counter-archives of conflict, atrocity, and truth. So with this, I come to the conclusion. If we have time, we'll come later on. So to conclude, taken together, the graphic narrative discussed demonstrate how visual storytelling has become one of the most powerful modes of documenting conflicts in South Asia. In contexts where official archives are shaped by silence, denial, erasure, or exclusion, these graphic narratives or visual verbal narratives function as counter-archives, preserving the lived experiences of communities who are otherwise written out of history. And ultimately, this paper showcases that graphic narratives are not merely artistic interpretations of conflict, they're archives of truth, witnessing, practices, and memory technologies that demonstrate history from below. They reclaim agency for marginalized subjects, challenge dominant historiography, and open up new ethical and political possibilities for understanding war, justice, and memory in the South Asian context. In doing so, they reaffirm the urgent need to read visual culture as an indispensable part of contemporary conflict documentation and as a vital archive for imagining more just futures. So, thank you for listening, and thank you.
So yes, Anzulina, it was a very, very excellent lecture that you've delivered right now. You really showed how powerful the medium of the graphic narrative can be in talking about social conflict, and by combining the visual media along with the text, and how the visual medium of the graphic novel can be so effective that it can actually make significant marks in the mind of the reader as well as whoever goes through it or analyzes it. So this way, I'm sure that this lecture has opened pathways for research scholars to explore new areas. It has actually made them understand the fact that there are quite a few, several graphic narratives out there which do deserve significant critical analysis. And you have been really able to do that by beginning it in a very substantial way and then bringing in several examples and very relevant ones. So it was such a very comprehensive and inspiring lecture. Thank you very much. Now there is one question in the chat box. This is from Professor Smita Agarwal, who has congratulated you for the lecture. Would Calicut paintings come under the purview of your discussion?
Calicut paintings. Thank you for bringing. Okay, thank you for bringing that to my notice, ma'am. I must honestly confess I've not looked into Calicut paintings, but I had looked into Potachitro, Bengali Potachitro paintings, Bengali and Oriya. I did not really go there, at least for this research paper. I wanted to begin from comics, but of course they can be comics as well as Potachitra paintings, the indigenous Buganda art form. We would like to, because all these arts were indulging in storytelling without the verbal aspects. So they definitely contribute to this mode that we are embracing now. But thank you for bringing that up. I'll definitely look it up now.
And are there any others in the meeting who would like to raise any questions? Please come here, Chari. Chari, ma'am. Are there any other questions from the participants in the meeting? Research scholars? You want to ask a question, do you? Please come forward. After ma'am.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Basu and Dr. Sebastian. This was, I think, one of the very timely and relevant lectures. I have a comment and a question. The comment is, ma'am, that we are at an interesting technological point in our cultural evolution, where the meaning of literacy has changed. Now, literacy does not mean just the written alphabet, letters of the alphabet. It has become visual literacy. And it is very empowering. It should be welcomed because internet is being used the way it is because of visual literacy. People who are not literate in the traditional sense are using internet by means of visual literacy. That is one point. It is enabling. And ma'am, the question is that can we link you said that the graphic narratives have originated or recognized since 1990s. I have a slight doubt about that. Would you say that the actual origins of graphic narratives go back to illustrations? And what do you have to say about French tapestries?
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you for the observation as well. I cannot agree with you more. In fact, we have to, visual literacy is something that we have to embrace. And I think it has been very beneficial, not only to the present generation, but us as well. I think it helps understand better. And with the present generation, where there is so much attention, disruption, when we are teaching in class, when images are furnished alongside, it really helps hold the students' attention as well. With regard to your question, I agree with you, ma'am, that it did originate with the illustration. So when Pottuchitru art or indigenous art forms are talked about, in that case, we should go back as far as the cave paintings, actually. But when I was talking about graphic novel in the graphic narratives in the South Asian context, I was maybe particularly highlighting on the term graphic narrative, which is the serious kind of graphic novels. So the first one that comes in the literary landscape in that sense is the Arijit Sen's River of Stories. That is what I was trying to bring out. But I wanted to also say that if you were to look into the comic book format, then we can trace it back to Chanda Mama. But as you rightly mentioned, ma'am, if we were to look into the origins of graphic visual verbal literacy, we have to go back to the cave paintings as well. I think when we were doing this course with my students, we actually did that. So we took them to visit in one of at that time I was working in Telangana near Oxford University. So there were local cave paintings near Sangareddy. So we took them there and we tried to, with a guide, and we tried to interpret the stories. So definitely that's there, ma'am. Have I answered your question, ma'am? Aloysius, you're not audible.
Yes, now I hope we are audible.
Yes, no. Did I answer
Hello.
it question?
Hello, ma'am. This is Madhuri Mishra, research scholar from this university, and I just want to thank you because, ma'am, I hope you remember we met in IFLU for the conference.
Yes,
and
Madhuri, I remember you.
Yes, ma'am. And you helped me with the with book Munnu, a boy from Kashmir, which I find very interesting. I have included for my primary source for my thesis, as I am working on graphic literature. So I just wanted to thank you to come here and deliver a very interesting lecture, which is very interesting, and which will help for my thesis. So I just wanted to thank you, ma'am.
The
You're
pleasure
so
is all mine. Pleasure is all mine, Madhuri. All the best with your research, and let me know if I can be of help in the future as well. Yeah, you have my contact. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Antarleena, there is another question from another research scholar. The question is in the chat. How has the adoption of graphic novels, you can see the question there, in South
Just a
Asia
moment.
been... Yeah, yes.
I'm trying to access the chat box.
Or I can read it for you.
Okay.
Yeah. The question is like this. It goes like this. How has the reception of graphic novels in South Asia been shaped by linguistic diversity and varying levels of literacy across the region?
Very interesting question. Very interesting and very layered question. So again, you bring in, I think this would require a lecture of its own altogether. But yes, regional literatures have regional graphic literatures have played a very significant part in contributing to the visual cultures, visual literacy, visual graphic literacy in India, as well as South Asia at large. In fact, I did not mention, because we're primarily focusing on English narratives here. In Bangladesh, we have Mujib, the entire series of Mujib, which is based on the life of Mujibur Rahman, which talks about which serializes the entire Bangladesh Liberation War. Then we talk about in Pakistan we have graphic narratives, more like comics, on the Siachen, on the war in Siachen, war with regard to Siachen 1999 Kargil War, of course from their version where they were the victors. So these narratives are there, and these are being written in regional writings. These are regional languages. They have also contributed to shaping the literary landscape and acceptance of the literary landscape. I have heard, I'm not being able to name it now, but I think it was with Dr. Aloysius itself, how Malayali culture had its own visual forms, which helped him embrace this genre easily. Same with me. When I was reading Tintin first in Bengali, and much later in English. In fact, it was only when I was delving into translation studies, I wanted to see what happened to those translations of Tintin from English to Bengali, and also the original French ones. So this is they really do they play a part in augmenting, let's say, in enriching this literary landscape. However, again, this would require a lecture of its own. If I have answered your question.
Yes, you have actually explained it very well. And is there any who are seated here who would like to raise any question? In case there is, you'll have to come over here. So I think all the questions are done with. Actually, your lecture has led to several interesting queries and discussions, which itself shows how the fact that it has raised a lot of interest in the graphic narrative, the medium of the graphic narrative. And, as I was introducing this lecture, the second lecture of the series, the way that you began your lecture was exactly that came to my mind. How long back this manuscript had been sent to a prominent journal in India. And even though it had been indexed in Scopus and Web of Science, they themselves were not familiar with the scope of graphic narratives and comic books, because it had a comic book, which was considered as silly, quote unquote silly. But now even those times there used to be some amount of research, even from India, as we know the case with from our own Women's Studies Center, Diva Srinivas and Nandini Chandra and others had some work done on Amar Chitrakada. So it was surprising that a prominent journal was not familiar with it in those times. But now, on the other hand, graphic narratives, research in graphic narratives have gained more prominence, and people have realized its scope, and there are many people who are working on it. So that's something that we welcome most gladly. Thank you very much for such a comprehensive and excellent lecture that has led to very interesting discussions and queries from the part of the fraternity over here. So now I pass over to Anshima to deliver the vote of thanks. Anshima.
Thank you, Dr. Aloysius, and thank you, Indrani ma'am, for this kind invitation. And it was lovely interacting with you all.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for this wonderful session. As Henry Ford very rightly remarks, coming together is a beginning, keeping together is progress, and working together is a success. So on the behalf of the Department of English and Modern European Languages, University of Allahabad, I would like to extend our heartfelt gratitude to everyone whose presence made this event possible. First and foremost, I would like to extend my sincere thanks to our respected speaker, Dr. Basu, for her insightful words which enriched our understanding. A special gratitude to the head of the department, Dr. Indrani Mukherji, for her constant support and guidance. Thank you to the coordinator, Dr. Aloysius Sebastian sir, for the smooth coordination, and special thanks to Professor Manoj Kumar for his support and guidance. I would also like to thank all the faculty members whose presence and encouragement always motivates us. A warm appreciation to the organizing team who worked behind the scenes in order to run the program smoothly. And finally, I would like to thank all the research scholars and participants, including those who joined us from outside the institution. Your presence really made this event successful. Thank you once again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aloysius. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you all.
Participants, we are concluding it here. And I express my gratefulness to the technical team of research scholars who have helped me quite very efficiently with all the work. Even though we did face with certain technical issues because of some, of course, which is something that is unpredictable, which were not entirely in our hands. So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Antarleena.
Thank you. Thank you.